Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events and this podcast. On the show, I talk to experts who are in all facets of food and beverage, from doctors and farmers and chefs to eaters to advocates. Everyone eats. So everyone has a different dietary need and wants. And I just want everybody to understand how we can collaboratively sit down to a table and enjoy a meal together, because breaking bread builds relationships, builds business, and so much more. And this month, May, is Celiac Disease Awareness Month, as well as Food Allergy Awareness Month. But today we're going to focus on celiac disease. And my guest is someone who I have probably been following since I started this work in 2009, 2010, Erica Dermer. And she is a digestive health advocate and content creator under the handles of Celiac and the Beast. And so welcome to the show, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm so honored to have you on my show. I think the first Fab blog conference, food allergy blogger conference that I heard you speak, you were talking about how to do your social media for people who were in, like you and I, with dietary needs, and get our messaging out and how to do it the right way, et cetera. But we're not going to talk about social media today so much. I want to talk about your journey and, you know, how you came to know that you had celiac disease and what that journey has been like. And one thing that I want to point out to people that I found a study is that the average diagnosis, the age for average diagnosis is 45. And that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
And that there are 1 in every 133 people have celiac disease.
Yeah, if not more. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us a little bit about how you got where you.
Yeah, I mean, so I was diagnosed at 25, and sometimes it's like an average of like 7 years to diagnosis for most people, because celiac disease is often the great imitator. There's so many other diseases that it imitates, and other diseases imitate celiac disease. I mean, it's just like there's over like 300 symptoms really when you break it down, and it imitates so many different things that, you go through this process with GIs. And oftentimes, if you're not the standard, like malnourished idea of what they think celiac presents as, which is not true, but if they're an old school doctor and they think that you're presented with like a bloated belly, like the kids on the Sally Struthers commercials, right, that are malnourished from the 90s, that's what they think celiac disease presents as. Typically does not present that way, especially in adults. So a lot of people go through this like 7-year struggle of trying to get diagnosed. For me, it was pretty similar. A shortened time period, a couple of years. I got sick one night. I never got better. I think I had like a rotavirus, like a stomach bug, and that can be a trigger for setting off your body for celiac disease, along with pregnancy or surgery or an illness or a car accident. Just anything crazy can set your body off. And then I was sick, went to the GI. They thought it was a million different things. I was on a million different medications that some were black boxed by the FDA, but I took them anyway. They were thinking about giving me a gastric pacemaker. I had a million different scans of different images inside my body, a million different tests, poked and prodded. And then it turns out all I had to go to was Mayo Clinic for a physician that actually knew signs of celiac disease and how to properly test for it. And bingo, diagnosis, better.
Wow, that's amazing. And so let's it's just mind-boggling that it takes so many tests and so many years to get diagnosed. But let's go over what celiac is as well. And before we got on the show, I was telling you how I diagnose or how I describe what celiac is, and it affects people. And it's this shag rug that's the inside of your intestines. And that's what it looks like when you eat gluten, right?
Yeah. So it's a genetic autoimmune disease, predisposed to it from parents, right? So if you have parents or first degree relative, you're more apt to have it. You're more apt to have celiac if you have another autoimmune disease, because they tend to be just friends forever and they tend to be groups. So what happens is your body can't absorb nutrients because the villi of your small intestine are blunted. They're supposed to be long and beautiful, like strands of hair, and like a shag carpet or like whatever, fingers, right? So they're supposed to absorb all these nutrients. And then as celiac happens, your body is actually attacking itself because it thinks of gluten as an invader, which it's not. Normal people can eat gluten and be fine. But with celiac disease, it actually blunts your villi to turn into this. And then you can't absorb nutrients. So you're nutritionally deficient, which ends up in a host of different issues. And that's why there's over 300 symptoms. When you are, deficient, you can't absorb anything in your body. Not only will you have malnutrition, but because you're deficient in all these things, you'll get osteoporosis at a young age. I had osteopenia in my bones at 25. Like, that's not supposed to happen. I was deficient in all major vitamins. I was like 115 pounds sopping wet. And, when you eat a gluten-free diet, then your villi can get happy and start absorbing things again. And then I just love this little thing. And then you're happy. So then your villi can absorb nutrients. A lot of people gain weight on a gluten-free diet, which is why it's not a diet. It's a medically necessary diet. So people start to absorb everything in your villi again. And your body has nothing to attack. So it's happy. You gain weight, you get some nutrients back in your life, you cut down your risk for osteoporosis, you cut down your risk for other autoimmune diseases. I have like carpeting from this thing coming off, sorry. But yeah, so it's your body is happy once again, and it's the only autoimmune disease that we know the trigger and we know the cure, which is a diet. And it's not necessarily a cure. You're going to have celiac for the rest of your life, but you can manage it on a
So you can manage it on a diet, a gluten-free diet.
Absolutely. So a strict gluten-free diet, which is what we like to say, because a gluten-free diet where you're just kind of eating out of shared fryers and not really paying attention to the oats that you consume, that's how you can get into trouble. So it's really important for you to be on a strict celiac safe diet. And there are a very small percentage of celiacs who do not heal on a gluten-free diet. That's called refractory celiac. And that is treated hopefully in the future with pharmaceutical interventions that we'll have soon.
Okay. That's interesting. They're working really hard to find, medicine for peanut allergies and things like that, or just allergies in general. So it's good that they're also working for, help with celiac disease.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because it is a struggle. And what you have on your website is you're a gluten-free girl living in a world of wheat. Mm-hmm. And, a couple of years ago, I went on a road trip with my niece and she bought us Twizzlers. And I'm like, Elle, and she was on a gluten-free diet at the time because of sports and all of this other stuff. And it was impacting her. But I'm like, we can't eat Twizzlers. She's like, why not? Yeah. I'm like, because there's wheat in Twizzlers. And she's like, what? Yeah. Yeah. So it's hidden in a lot of different products. And that's, sesame just came out listed as one of the top 9 allergens, so it will be required. But gluten doesn't fall under the Food Allergy Labeling and Consumer Protection Act. It falls under its own regulations.
Yeah, so it makes it extra hard for us to read products. Mm-hmm. So if you have a strict wheat allergy, it's different on how you interpret the labels because of that FALCA Act. Mm-hmm. You would see wheat labeled, but they don't necessarily have to label barley or rye. Mm-hmm. So the biggest thing is barley malt is hidden in a lot of products because it's delicious. It adds flavoring. That's why we can't have Rice Krispie treats. So it's not necessarily safe just because it's wheat free, which makes a difference.
Right. Exactly. And so gluten-free is no wheat, rye, or barley.
Right. Or contaminated oats, because oats is one of the major things, along with lentils, but that's a whole other issue.
Oh, wow.
In the processing of oats, it's often commingled with other grains, meaning if you eat just regular Quaker oats out of the box, you're more likely getting like hundreds of parts per million versus 20 parts per million, which is safe for celiac.
Okay. So 20 parts per million, which is like a crumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that little bout can actually wreak havoc on your small intestine.
It can cause symptoms. We don't necessarily know if it can cause damage to the villi just once. So like if you get gluten once, a lot of people are in like this massive panic saying like, oh my God, like what's going to happen to me? But like it's for the most part, if you get contaminated, it sucks. You're going to get symptoms, but it's not a long-term damage versus if you're eating more than 20 parts per million on a regular basis. Okay. That's when things start to get kind of sketchy.
Okay. That makes sense. Quote unquote cheating, which is not a good thing to do on a regular basis.
Like that. Yeah. No. Exactly. Like, and if you get cross-contaminated, like it happens, but when people purposely ingest gluten, especially like, oh, I'm just going to have pizza, like that's not okay. Like some people have to travel and they go out to restaurants that they think are safe. Sometimes they get contaminated, like it happens to all of us, but purposely going out there and having like a slice of pizza, not good.
Yeah. I went to a restaurant for Mother's Day and it's the only starter that was gluten-free were the fries. And I'm like, okay, really? They're gluten-free? And she's like, yeah. And she went and checked and she's like, because it's Mother's Day and we're busy, we can't do those today. And I was assuming that they were going to use double fryers, to get everything out. And I'm like, which was very disappointing because everybody else is having a starter and I couldn't have a starter, but it is what it is.
You want a bland salad?
Right. Exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
Take the cheese off, take the croutons off, and you have iceberg lettuce or romaine. Yeah. Okay. So I was listening to your conversation with our friend Margaret Clegg about traveling, and you do a lot of traveling for your job as well as for media for Celiac and the Beast, and it's challenging traveling, and attending conferences. So talk to me about and tell everybody about what is a good experience for you when you're going to a conference. Have you had one?
Yeah. The only good experience I had at a conference are the conferences that I planned, where I've met with the chefs in advance and I've met with the catering team and I've met with the hotel. And that's really sad because that can't happen all the time. I've had more horror stories than not, only because I travel so often. I'm not saying that like every time you go, it's going to be a nightmare, but sadly, the travel industry has not caught up with the rest of the restaurant industry, and they use a lot of old school catering methods that are just not safe for us. And their labeling isn't standard practices, and sometimes it can be a nightmare. And I've had many conferences that I've flown out and I've had to eat at the same restaurant for every single meal because the conference hotel staff didn't know anything. That was in New Orleans. It was a nightmare. They were only able to give me steamed vegetables for the entire conference, and that's not really nutritionally sound, even for a vegan. So it's oftentimes a nightmare, and sadly, when you get a chance to actually talk to the staff and talk to the chefs, they get it. But I don't understand why that isn't happening on a regular basis to make people like you and me able to go to a conference and feel like we can have similar food. I'm not asking for the same exact food, but like similar food, or at least the same nutritional value as the food served to everyone else.
Well, and I like the fact that you put nutritional value, because it is. I know of people that have been given a plate of carrots for their vegan or their vegetarian dish, main entree, and same thing with people with gluten-free, or people who are gluten-free automatically get the vegan dish, and it's vegan, gluten-free, it's dairy-free, it's all of these things, everybody gets that one dish, which is fine. But there's a lot of people also who are gluten-free that aren't vegan.
Yeah. One event that I went to, I had a plate full of lettuce and no safe dressing. So I had sriracha, and iceberg lettuce, tomato, and sriracha. And I'm like, I feel like this is not a great plate of food.
Mhm.
And then other places I'm only able to have fruit, or like oftentimes I'm only able to have a salad. And then I like go to the dressing and there's like croutons floating in it from like idiots that were just dipping and not even paying attention. So like they didn't contaminate the dressing, but like another person at the event did. So I'm like, great, another dry plate of lettuce. And I'm so tired of having that. There's so many conferences that they don't even think about having like several main portions being gluten-free, like have a gluten-free chicken, a gluten-free fish. Like it's not that hard to do. And that's what I don't get is it's not that hard to do. Like I'm literally just asking for gluten-free. You can make a gluten-free piece of salmon. It's pretty easy. So they mix it up and then they're like, and then it's all vegan. And I'm like, but I'm not vegan. Like I still want a piece of meat or some sort of protein. Like they don't even offer a protein. It's just vegetable.
Right.
So you're often lacking this like whole idea of like, I just want a varied diet that's safe for me at a conference, and to just have an option. Again, Louisiana, I was only offered steamed vegetables. That's not really a complete protein. So I had to go to like the closest restaurant was, I think, like a Ruth Chris. And I was like getting a shrimp cocktail and a baked potato. And I'm like, well, I already have my vegetables. So I guess I'm going to get a starch and a protein. And I'm like, this is silly that I'm shelling out like $50 for this shrimp cocktail, right? Every night at a fancy restaurant. But it was the only restaurant within the vicinity that was able to serve me. And like when the hotel staff doesn't get it, like that's a problem.
Right. And that's very true, because you also have to think about, what is in that vicinity, especially if the conference is at a hotel that doesn't have a restaurant in it. Mm-hmm. It just has the meeting, the culinary team for the conference side. But, there are hotels that are out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And, and that's when you and I pack an entire extra suitcase of food to bring with us. Right.
Yeah. And even then it's just sad. Like there's so many places where I just had like a beef stick and a protein shake. And like, that's not really how I want to live for like 4 days, especially if I'm there for like 7 days. Thankfully, the times that I've been sent on assignment for like a long time have been like Austin. So it's super easy to eat anywhere, really great, or Denver. So for me, like that's great because I know all the great places I can go to. The hotels are really better at it. But like when you go to a place like Atlanta, Georgia, it's good sometimes. But then when you go outside of Atlanta, you don't know what you're going to get. And then Louisiana, just forget about it. Like I can't go back to that place because that's just not going to happen.
Wow.
Yeah. Everything's in a brew, which I guess is like, that's great for Louisiana if you want authentic stuff, but like, I can't eat it.
Right. Yeah. And you can go, because I'm actually going to New Orleans in a couple of next month, but it's like, you have to eat at specific places that, that you're not going to get New Orleans style food because it is always made with a roux that
I could eat at a crab boil and that's it. But like, I also don't want a crab boil for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's super weird.
Exactly. Okay. So if you were going to a conference, what would you like to see from a meeting, or, the communication methods, things like that?
Like my light just died. Now I'm only lit from one side. You get this new version of me. The joys of home office, right? Like you're like, okay, when are my lights going to go out? This is fun. And you actually have to put makeup on, which is shocking. But what I want from a meeting is like proper labeling. And that's so sad that doesn't happen. Like if you're going to have a gluten-free item, then have it truly be gluten-free. For one, bacon, that's the number one thing. I always tell people about it. There's an old catering trick where you put bread underneath the bacon to absorb the fat, and same with like sausages or any other meat products, usually for like a breakfast buffet. And it's a mess because it's touching the bread. So it's not gluten-free. So I can't tell you how many meeting planners I've had to tell, or catering staff, that I'm like, this isn't gluten-free anymore. You have to remove this. And I stand there and anyone who comes by, I'm like, you're celiac? Okay, don't eat the bacon. They're like, why? I already ate it. And I'm like, seriously? So that's big. If you're going to like label it, make sure it follows a standard gluten-free labeling. You don't have to be 20 parts per million, although I'd love everyone to test. But like, if you're going to label it gluten-free, make sure you're at least avoiding cross contact. That's the biggest thing, is like, just think about it. Like if you're going to label it, just think about it. or they label things gluten friendly. And you're
I was
like,
just going to ask you that. Yep.
is it friendly to gluten or friendly to people who are gluten-free? Like, I don't even understand what this label is that you just made up. So there's just like a lot of issues. And if you think something's not going to be safe, then tell me, but also allow me to use my own judgment. Like, don't say it's not safe just because you don't know. If I ask you, like, was the sausage prepared in its own pan, like just using oil? And they're like, yeah, but I don't know. And I'm like, I know, so it's safe for me. Like, I just want someone to know, and like, they don't know. And I don't know how many managers I have to ask, like, how is this cooked before someone can give me an answer? And I'm like, how do you not know? Like, this is your job to manage the staff and how it's cooked in the back of the house. Like, if there's no communication between the back of the house and the front of the house, we're all screwed. Like, we shouldn't be eating that food, period. Like, it's just, how do you not know the ingredients that you have or the products that you use or how you cook it? Like, that's the biggest thing. And so a good example would be like, when things are properly labeled, when I have a nutritionally similar item available to me, chicken for salmon or whatever, like some sort of protein, some sort of carbohydrate. I don't even need desserts. Like, if you're offering desserts, like, that's great if you have one, but like, I just don't make me eat steamed vegetables or like a dry plate of lettuce every time.
Right. Totally agree. Now, on labeling, would you want, like, so let's say the first 3 ingredients are gluten-free. So we've noted them that they're gluten-free. And then the 4th one is not gluten-free. Do you want it to say contains gluten?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to. I think I don't need an entire meeting catered to me. So gluten-free is enough for me, whatever. I think that the biggest thing is, like, someone's going to ask. So just have someone understand. Like, if I'm like, hey, are these potatoes made gluten-free? I want someone to just be able to tell me. Right. That's all I want. It's just like, just know your ingredients. Or like, if I ask what brand of sausage this is, if it's not labeled, and I'm like, what brand of sausage do you use? Because I know all the brands of sausages and I'll know if they're gluten-free or not. Just tell me. Like, it's not that hard,
Okay, so speaking of products, and somewhere, I think it was on your website, you're like, I don't cook a lot, so I utilize a lot of, different products that must be labeled a variety of different ways. So do you have some that you love to eat that would be great to be served at a meeting? And some challenge of that is that it may be in the grocery store, but it may not be available food service wise.
Yeah. And thankfully now in 2021, or we're still living in 2019, because really nothing's been updated since then, but food service for gluten-free is so easy. Like, there's so many great brands that are available for food service. Like, that shouldn't be a barrier to you. Your barrier is a safe cooking space in the back of the house, right? Like, there's a million gluten-free pancake mixes that are available to food service. I know this for a fact. But if you don't have a clean cooking space, then you might as well not buy gluten-free pancake or waffle mix.
Right.
Yeah, it's not about the product. It's actually about using like a dedicated space for that.
That's such a good point, because with a hotel, you've got a lot of space, or for the most part, big hotels have lots of spaces. They probably have multiple kitchens. So have a dedicated space, have a dedicated waffle maker, have a dedicated griddle, to do those things.
Yeah, if Disney can do it, you can do it. I promise. Right. It's not that hard to have a dedicated waffle maker.
Right, exactly. And who cares if that waffle maker is on another side? Because you also don't want that waffle maker to be right next to the one that's not the gluten-free waffle maker, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's so easy just to have a dedicated space. I know that people can do that because I've seen it at hotels. So, and they're not like the Ritz-Carlton, like, they're not major hotel brands, like a normal hotel. I'm not asking for gluten-free food to be available at the morning buffet at like Holiday Inn or whatever, like a 2 to 3 star. Like, that's fine. You've got to really mitigate costs and returns on the profit. Like, that's great that you have fruit and vegetables for me in the morning. But like, if you're a meeting space at a hotel that has a bunch of conferences or meetings, like, you should have that opportunity, and you have that in the back of the house. I know that you can.
Right. Yep, exactly. Now, what tips do you have for individuals who have celiac disease about going to conferences?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is you can call in advance and talk to a manager or like a back of the house or a front of the house person, just to see like what are their methods to contain cross contact. If it's a larger chain like Hyatt or Marriott, like I trust that they've gone through some sort of training for mitigating allergies. So I typically don't call unless I'm going to be there for a while and unless I don't know the area and I'm going to be stuck at the hotel.
Right.
But you can always call if it makes you feel better. If this is a new conference you've never been to and you don't know if they're going to offer gluten-free food, you can always call and just say, hey, I'm coming up for this conference. I'd like to talk to, the catering manager to see if there's going to be any safe options, like so I know what to bring, or if I can help you better understand or better plan meals. It's okay to ask. It's okay to call every time. Like you're not being a bother. Their job is service and your job is to be a good customer. And it's better to go on the front end and ask a lot of questions than be upset and leave a bad review afterwards.
Well, and I love that because making that call in advance, even telling the meeting planner, if there's food and beverage served with your conference that your registration fee covers, then you definitely need to let the meeting planner know.
Absolutely.
You need to be your own advocate because we don't know to feed you gluten-free if you don't tell us.
And thankfully, like most of the meetings that I've been to in the past few years, 2009, 2018, 2017, they've all had, do you have a dietary restriction on the sign up for the event? So, if I go for my job and I'm a vendor, like they don't know. And because I don't follow the same sign up procedures as a actual attendee. But as an attendee, I can thankfully tell them my dietary restrictions. And if I think it's going to be a problem, I know who exactly to reach out to. It's very different when you travel for work and you're stuck at conferences that like you have to be a vendor. They don't treat you the same. You don't get to tell them the same thing. You often don't get to eat the same meals as attendees. So that's a whole nother issue. You have to like mitigate, traveling to the surrounding area and seeing if there's a safe place for you to eat within the general vicinity.
That's a really good point because I've worked conferences, planned conferences that the exhibitors are not invited to. It's just for attendees, sponsored by a sponsor, a company. I like that different angle of that. So thank you for pointing that out. Because that
sucks, honestly, because as an attendee, I feel like I have way more like, hey, I paid for this ticket and I would like to see, similar food items given to me. As an exhibitor, I'm like, yeah, I paid you a ton of money, but like, you don't owe me food. You just owe me this 10 by 10 exhibit space. And too many times, like I've had a lot of people who are like, yeah, I travel for work and I don't get the same like treatment as I do if I were like a paid attendee for the blogging conference. So I think it's very different traveling for work versus like traveling as an attendee of a conference, which you have a lot more sway with the exhibitor or with the meeting planner.
Right. Oh yeah. I really love that. Completely different perspective because when we planners, do have two different thought processes about each side of that equation of the planning process. But that also includes your audiovisual teams and their decor teams. And your volunteers, if you're feeding them, you need to be asking them, if you're going to be feeding them, you need to be asking them, but you also need to be considering the fact of what is available to eat if you're not feeding them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it is, your events are planning a holistic view, holistic event, and it's not just attendees. So
I just eat out of my backpack for the most time, and that's really terrible, but
it is really terrible. And going through, going through exhibits, right? And it's going to change a lot because of COVID, what we're allowed to do on exhibit floors, especially with food and beverage service and things like that. But I really think exhibitors, I know at most of the shows that you go, probably like Natural Products Expo and Fancy Food Show and all of that, or especially, probably have things labeled on their buffets or their tables because they're serving specific kinds of food.
Yeah, you would think. Sadly, fancy food that's happening right now. And I'm like, man, I'm struggling to find proper labels for a lot of things. And I'm not sampling, I'm online because it's a virtual one. But even then, like fancy foods has a different target audience. And so specialty diet consumers, like fancy food show, is very much not in tune to the allergy universe, and they never have been, because they're definitely a different crowd versus natural products is more like, yeah, we will tell you for GMO free and gluten free and dairy free and vegan and certified organic, and like they know the labels. And it just so happens the natural industry, they just get labeling, they understand certifications, they get it. So I feel way more comfortable going there versus another event with food where they just, that's not their thing, you know, and it's really hard to talk to anyone at fancy food, especially if there's like a language barrier, to see if there's anything that's safe. So for the most part, I don't eat on the show floor there. At Natural Products Expo, I do. And who knows, in Philadelphia this fall, if I'm going to even be able to sample on the show floor. But if I do, it's going to be from brands that I've already eaten before. So.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's well, and then all of the labeling, it gets a little bit overwhelming when you see all these different icons on packaging and, you know, different labeling things. And, you know, the only place that they actually need to be quote unquote honest is on the white nutritional box, right? On the back.
Yeah.
So they could put stuff on the front. Let's go back to the point. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of FPOs, like for placement only. So a lot of them, they don't have the finalized ingredients. And so I'm like, oh, I guess just call me when you get the finalized ingredients, because I'm not going to eat this until I know what's actually in it.
Yeah. Is there ever, you know, because spices don't have to be labeled because they're so small. I'm sure that there's gluten probably in some of those spices.
Yeah, for the most part, they're found in spice blends. Right. Honestly, the amount of spice that you're eating, it's just like, I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but it's just like prescription medication. The small, minute amount that could be in spices would be so tiny compared to what you're using it for, right? So you're going to do a sprinkle of salt, sprinkle or whatever. You're not dumping in like a pound of spice into something. So the amount that would possibly in there would be so tiny, just like a small pill that would use like wheat starch instead of pre-gelatinized rice starch or potato starch or whatever. Like, yeah, it's nice that there have Gluten Medication Act, don't get me wrong, but we've all talked about it from a science perspective. Like, you'd have to eat so much of that to actually get that 20 parts per million, because you use so little. So spices are actually not really ever on my radar. And for the most part, if I'm going to eat something that has spices in it, it's probably going to be labeled gluten-free anyway. Like if it is an international product, I'm always sketchy just because I don't know what their testing is, you know, unless they're from Ireland or the UK that maybe has strict things, or Australia that has a stricter gluten-free rule than us. But yeah, for the most part, spices aren't necessarily on my radar. It's like when it has starch without being labeled and it's not labeled gluten-free, or it's from a company that I don't know, that's when I'm like, I'm going to investigate a little more. But for the most part, that doesn't like hold me up as much as some other things.
Okay, so talk about starch. Explain to people why starch is an issue.
It's annoying. So in the most part, starch in the US, if it's not labeled, is going to be like a cornstarch or potato starch, because wheat is a top allergen and most brands don't want to deal with top allergens. Right. You're not going to see a barley starch or a rye starch. So for starch, it's only wheat. And there is something called gluten-free Codex approved wheat starch, and that's celiac safe. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole to get into. Wow. But for the most part, if you see a starch on an item and it's, you know, labeled gluten-free, it's going to be potato starch or cornstarch, because corn is subsidized, potatoes are everywhere, it's cheap. You know, starch is the filler. So they're not going to want to introduce an allergen. So for the most part, they're going to use whatever's cheap, which is usually corn.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. So I'm just going through my notes that I wrote over there. To ask you, I think we've covered a lot in what that means and how to go to a conference. And I think it's just really important for you want to sit down at a meal and you want to enjoy that meal with me and Caroline and, all of our friends, whether it's food allergy bloggers conference or, whatever it is. Because I'm sure there's numerous times that you felt excluded from that meal.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because you're supposed to use these like lunches for bonding. And I'm like, I can't really bond when you're eating and I'm not, or I'm eating out of like a bag that I brought with me. Like that's not the same thing. And it's really hard. And like oftentimes we'll find each other. I'm like, ooh, that person's gluten-free. I'm going to go sit with them. So it's not so awkward. Like if you're new to a conference and you don't know anybody or like you're a vendor, I'm like, I'm just going to sit in my booth and eat by myself. So it takes all like the bonding experience that is eating together and like having shared experiences. Like that's a big part of what meals are.
Mm-hmm.
And it very much excludes people that can't have a similar thing to eat, or they're eating nothing and they're just sitting around drinking water and you're like, who's that weirdo? So it takes away a lot of like the bonding process that meals bring together.
Yeah, so true. Now, that reminded me of something that you said. It is the psychological effects. And I think it was on Gastro Girl podcast. You were talking about, it's not just the food that you have to eat without, right? It's also an emotional and psychological struggle. So
yeah, the psychosocial issues of like eating differently than other people are a struggle for a lot of people because you're at a heightened anxiety level because you're worried about everything that you're eating. So you can't have that normal like relaxing time to go together. And then if you're not eating the same thing, you automatically feel like someone's judging you or they think that you're different. And nobody wants to be different. We all want to fit in, and you're automatically making yourself different. So there's so many issues that you have to deal with. And that's why it's like, talk to a nutritionist, talk to a therapist. Like there's a lot of things that go along with the diagnosis of eating different instead of just like the meals. There's so many more aspects to it. And if you don't have a friend and you already feel bad about what you're eating, it's going to be isolating. And like, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be the kid eating alone in the bathroom stall at lunch in junior high. And like, that's what a lot of us feel like as grown adults. And that's not how it should be. We should be able to enjoy meals together, or at least have less anxiety than every bite is like, it shouldn't be anxiety driven. It should be like, hey, we're coming together as a meal and these are my people and I want to experience the joy and beauty of eating together, and we're missing out on it.
Yeah. Oh, and you don't think about it unless you have it. And I tell people It's not like something you go to the store and buy and then you don't like it and you're going to go to the store and return it, right? You're living with this day in and day out, and it is a medical need. It is not a, hey, I'm trying the Atkins diet or whatever this month.
Yeah. So keto people that complain about like not being able to eat with it, I'm like, whatever, shut up. I hate you. I hate keto people that are like, I'm keto. And I'm like, great, cool. I don't care. Like, try being gluten-free for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not a diet. It's a medical need. And I think that we've done a disservice to our universe, not labeling the gluten-free diet as a medical diet. Like we don't think about diabetes the same way we think about gluten-free food or insulin for diabetes, right? Like we don't think about that. It's just so silly that like it has now become this like, oh, they eat different. What's up with that? It's a total disservice to our disease. And like, this is what we need to survive. And we're being judged for it. And it's silly.
Right. Yeah, it's totally silly. And granted, there are people who are eating gluten-free because of they're just trying something. But
there's other medical needs that need a gluten-free diet. And I don't want to, people that have a wheat allergy or people that really do have a severe gluten intolerance or have a FODMAP issue, whatever the issue is that we think is related to the protein. No, but don't minimize our diet,
right?
And don't use it as a fad diet. Like it's a medically necessary diet for those that need it.
Oh, that's the where to end it on, because I think that's the most important part is like, it is a medical need. It's
our prescription drug. Like you wouldn't judge me for going to a pharmacy for Xanax. In fact, you'd probably applaud me for doing that. And you're like, calm down. But you wouldn't judge me for any other prescription that I need. So why are we doing this with our medically necessary diet?
Oh, it is a prescription. It's a diet prescription that otherwise you're going to harm yourself.
Yeah, literally in like the UK, it is a prescription diet. And you are like given prescription foods. You can shop for food at the pharmacy. And like, maybe that's what we should have done. Like, because it's not the same way here. And food manufacturers, meeting planners, other people, they don't treat it as such, and it should be.
Well, and that reminds me of listening to Alice Best. It may have been at Natural Products, where she said she spoke at a gastroenterologist conference, and then she went to the airport to leave, and she was trying to order something from a fast food joint. I think it was Mexican. And the lady, she was just struggling with having that conversation. And the woman behind her ordering, she's like, oh my God. She's like, I just sat through your session and I'm a gastroenterologist, and I diagnosed my patients with, hey, here's celiac. You've got celiac. Go on and live your life. But I've never witnessed them experiencing that like I just witnessed you trying to order something.
Yeah.
And it changed that doctor's perspective on what she does. And that's the thing, is like, you get diagnosed with celiac and they're like, go have a nice life, figure it out on your own.
Yeah. And that's why the work that I'm doing with like AGA is so important, to really put like the psychosocial aspects of diagnosing a patient with a disease. It's more than what you give them at the end of the appointment. Like, they have to go on living their life with this. And a lot of physicians don't understand that. So that's my current kind of quest in life, is to be that person that says like, hey, there's so much more than a diagnosis that you have to understand from your patient that comes in. You label them as crazy when really we're high anxiety because you've given us a change of life versus just a diagnosis.
Right. Yeah. And exactly. And the diagnosis and the change of life is this new diet. Yeah, exactly. Which you have to upend your whole world. And that's where like Emily Brown with the Food Equality Initiative, who was on using WIC and was going to the food banks and couldn't get anything for her girls who have food allergies. And so she started her own, because I think it's on WIC. It says you can only purchase whole wheat products.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane. A lot of, especially with the pandemic, like a lot of people had to change their life, and some people couldn't necessarily afford the food that they were getting before. And for them, they had to go to the food bank for the first time. So I got a lot of messages from people that are like, good luck, because I went to the food bank and I couldn't get anything. And I'm like, yeah, it's hard. Like, it's really difficult, because that's a whole nother issue. And Emily is such a great person. And I got a chance to tour her facility, and it's just really beautiful what she's doing. And I wish that more people understood that whole aspect of food insecurity. It's a lot more than, what a lot of us thankfully have to deal with. And it's a lot. So I'm glad that Emily is there kind of fighting the good fight for everyone.
Oh my gosh. She's a dream. And everybody, I will put the link to her interview that I actually think I interviewed her twice. I'll put the links in the show notes for this. So Erica, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tracy.
For everyone, Erica Dermer, Celiac and the Beast. She is a award-winning author. She is a digestive advocate, and just wants us all to be able to eat safely, especially with celiac disease. So this will get posted next week on the podcast, and you can pick it up on all podcast platforms. But thank you for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. And until next time, stay safe and eat well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.